Welcome, everyone. I'm Stella Tarnay, co-founder and executive director of Capital Nature, and I'd like to welcome you to the amazing birds of Washington, D.C. I know we have quite a few birders among us, and especially some DC master naturalists, so special shout out to you. And if you've always been curious about the birds of Washington, D.C., and you just haven't gone out to bird, this is going to be a great introduction because we have probably the city's most knowledgeable wildlife biologist and birder about the local scene. So you'll be hearing from Dan in a moment, and we're really lucky to have him. First, before I introduce Dan, let Anna introduce herself. She's my co of Capital Nature, and she does some pretty cool stuff. Anna, do you want to tell folks a bit about what you do?
Hey everybody, I'm Anna Kahanui, working with Stella and Capital Nature. I'm a Virginia Master Naturalist and a certified forest therapy guide. I'm a bona fide nature nerd and an avid user of iNaturalist, and I like to take bird photos and nature photos in general. So I'm going to be fielding questions in the chat, so please add your questions to the chat. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. So yeah, we're bona fide nature nerds, which is why we started Capital Nature. And the things that we do is, for one, we actually track some of the really amazing regional events that go on around nature. So if you go to our calendar, capitalnature.org/calendar, you're going to see just an amazing assortment of birding, citizen science, nature therapy, stewardship events throughout the DMV. So please take a look at that, capitalnature.org, and look at our calendar. Lots of great stuff going on. And then also we support citizen science. And then we ourselves do guided walks, whether it's trees or birds or pollinators. And we love the City Nature Challenge, which we'll keep you updated on. So again, a very warm welcome. And we're going to do this in 3 parts. So this is a lunchtime talk. We know some of you only have an hour or maybe even less. So for the first part of this, we're going to have Dan give his presentation on the birds of DC. We'll record that, and that'll live as an evergreen resource because I know a lot of people are interested in that. And then for the second part, the half hour that remains, for those that can stay on, especially the master naturalists, we're going to have a conversation about whatever questions you have about the birds, habitat, which is a really important issue, and then some of the protection measures that are taking place to help actually protect the birds in this area and the birds that fly through. So 2 parts, stay as long as you can. It's great to have you. So for this first part now, officially, let me introduce Dan Rauch, who is wildlife biologist for the District Department of Energy and Environment. And he is probably the city's most respected and knowledgeable birder. If you've heard anyone talking about birds on WAMU or WTOP, it's probably been Dan. If you can walk with him, that's great. And occasionally we get to have him give a presentation. So if you have a question about DC birds, Dan is one of the people you want to go to. So Dan is going to talk to us about the birds of the city, but also their habitats, which is a really cool combination talk. And I think at this point, Dan, if you could come on and put up your slides or say anything you want about yourself before you start, you're on.
Sure. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate you guys coming out. And as I always love talking birds. I just saw a question from Larry about talking about Montgomery County. I'm a biologist for the Department of Energy and Environment in the district, which means I'm going to focus today on this is really a brief overview of the birds of the district, where they are, where they're found, and why we have them. But I could talk about some of these areas for an hour a piece, but I just want to give you guys just a kind of a taste to get you guys interested, get you out there, to show you some of the really amazing birds we have in the district. So hang on 1 second, I'll pull this up and share my screen and we will get ready to go. So as I said before, I'm one of the fisheries and wildlife biologists with the District of Columbia. I specialize in birds. It's not all I do. I do a lot of other stuff with things that are going to impact birds, like deer populations, goose management, and a lot of our habitat programs. But today we're just going to focus on birds of DC, and where and when to find them. So the district really is a city of birds. We became an urban bird treaty city in 2011, and we currently have 58 avian species of conservation need, which is based off our state wildlife action plan, which every state, territory, and that which includes the district, puts together. It's congressionally mandated, and that focuses on it, tells us which species we can use state wildlife action funds in order to conserve those. So we have 58 for the district. We usually see somewhere between 200 and 230, 250 species in the district annually. Our current record right now, I need to change that. We're now at 324, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And the record for a big day in the district was set in 1989, which is seeing as many species as you can in one day, which is 136. So I just want to give you just a little bit of the range of the species you're going to find in the district. This little guy over here on the left is a yellow rump warbler. I usually don't name birds because they're not banded. I don't know if I'm going to see the same bird all the time, but I know this little guy butters because their nickname for these guys is butter butts. They come here in the winter, and you can see he's eating myrtle berries here, but I was doing duck surveys off of it's Windmill Hill Park in Virginia. I can see a good section of the Potomac River there. And this little yellow rump would show up all the time. He's there. It was just very gregarious. If I walked away from my scope, it would sit on top of it. But would see butters every 10 days. But it was an awesome bird to visit. And then this hawk here, this is a red-shouldered hawk. This is one of the pair that nested at Kingman and Heritage Islands last year. And you can't see because it's stuck in here underneath this thing, but it has a snake in its talons. I caught it having breakfast. Red-shouldered hawks are incredible snake hunters. When it comes to herps, snakes, frogs, toads, they're specialists. You'll sometimes see red-shouldered hawks taking a snake off the sidewalk or off a road, but that's just kind of where they specialize. So there's a very long history of ornithology in the district. President Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, kept a list of birds that he's seen on White House grounds and just around the district. These two in the middle here are barn owls. So barn owls are very rare in the district. I would have to go back and look and see when the last one was actually seen. It's probably been several years. But finding a barn owl now is very difficult, but it turned out, I didn't know because doing some research about owl populations in the district, and this is inside the Smithsonian Castle. They were apparently nesting in there for decades. And so I called a friend of mine who used to work in the castle, and he said, oh yeah, they were here because my office, they were actually 2 offices down, and my office still smelled like owls. So yes, they were definitely owls in the Smithsonian Castle down in the National Mall. And then this, whoops, I'm so sorry. I don't know why that wrote back. This here is Rachel Carson. So the book Silent Spring, which came out in 1971, which really identified and made the connection between the loss of birdsong and the loss of wildlife in our parks and contributing that to contamination. So Rachel Carson would actually lead bird walks through Glover Archibald Park. Anyone who showed up, bring your binoculars, bring a book. She would take anyone out on walks through Glover. So she is a local resident and birder. So there's a reason we have so many different species of birds right in such a small city. It's really becomes, we have 2 physiogeographic reasons which collide here. So we're talking about, we've got the Piedmont coming down out of the Appalachians, and then we have the coastal plain. And where those 2 collide goes right through the district. And you can see on this geological map of Rock Creek Park, there, the habitats over here are these nice, like soft sedimentary soils. And these are these metamorphic, very hard rocks through here. And it kind of splits right down through Rock Creek. So if you take a walk through Rock Creek Park, you can see in a couple of places where this cliff is, where these 2 meet. And you can see this rocky divide and these more sheer cliff-like structures that come through here. And they cut right through and go right through Roosevelt Island as well, Teddy Roosevelt Island through here, and then down into Virginia. So there are certain birds which use the coastal plain, and there's certain birds which use these higher elevation Piedmont areas. And here we get the best of both worlds, where it's where these 2 plains, these regions collide. So we get birds are going to be using both of those coming right through DC. And it's also a tale of hydrology. We have the Potomac River on our western side and the Anacostia on the east. They're very different rivers. They flow at very different speeds, very different sediment loads. So that increases the type of habitats we can have in DC. So with those two coming down, forming kind of the bottom of our diamond here, it brings in more species coming into our area. And then there's different level of urbanization. So we have, high level of densities and downtown, which can also be utilized by certain birds, certain generalists. So you'll find, like, you wouldn't think in Manhattan, the highest density of peregrine falcons are actually found in Manhattan, because those structures mimic kind of the cliff-like structures that they're used to. So some of our downtown areas mimic some of our downtown structures and our man-made structures kind of mimic some of the areas that some birds might use. So we bring those in as well. So it's kind of like everything comes through the district. So we're talking about the district itself. We're very lucky. Like, if you go up to New York City, Central Park is kind of that green gem rectangle in the middle, and there's not a whole lot on the outside for wildlife to use. But in the district, we're very much marbled through. We've got these fantastic park systems that run through the east side, the west side, and right down through the middle. And then we've got all these street trees and circle parks and the Civil War fort parks. So those all come together to give us almost 7,000 acres of national park and about 900 acres of district-owned park. So we really, truly are a green city. So the numbers on here this is from our State Wildlife Action Plan, and they correspond to what we consider to be conservation opportunity areas. That's places where we have high wildlife diversity. It's areas that we can go and do some work in to try to increase that density of wildlife, or also to try to recruit back some species we left. So these 8 sections are areas we concentrate on through DOE's Fish and Wildlife Division, try to make more of an impact in these areas where we know we can do that. Like, we're not going to have something downtown and be pouring resources into that to try to bring back certain species down to Penn Quarter, but we can do it in some of these other outlying areas. So what does those physiogeographical regions and those rivers, what does that give us? An incredible diversity of habitats just right here in DC. So this top picture here, this is the Potomac River Gorge. And you can see the Potomac River is coming down through here. On this side, one side is what we call, it's almost like a rocky steppeland, where one of the habitats here is called glacial scour. So when the ice age came through and brought these giant rocks, it kind of like scoured out deep pools, vernal pools, and some of these internal areas here. And then as it pulled back, it left rock structures there. It also left grasses. This is one of the highest plant diversities in the United States, is actually found right here in the Potomac Gorge. You're going to find grasses that you normally find out in the prairie are going to be in here. If we go down a little lower, it's the complete opposite. This is out here next to Heritage Island. It is flat. So this is out on our coastal areas. These are mud flats. And when I started the district, I guess this week, it's my 13th year in the district doing this. These were all mud flats. There was no vegetation here. So this has all been restored through goose management exclusion, and also through different programs such as rice rangers, where students will grow rice in their classrooms, and they'll come out here and plant this, and then they will come out and do a tour. So there's a connectivity between the students and the habitat they're restoring. And this is what the result is after a decade of work. And then if we go into the center of the city, this is what I consider to be kind of the heart of the district. It's much different. It's kind of where of course, the Piedmont and the coastal plain meet, and we have Rock Creek Park. It's like this almost ethereal little like fairy habitat where we have got moss, and we've got all these different tributaries and stream systems going through. It mists in the morning, so if you can almost hear the wood thrushes in the background here when you're going through Rock Creek Park, but they're all completely different, such a small space. So the district itself is also, all these habitats make us a key migration corridor. So one of the other reasons we have so many species is that when birds migrate through in the summer, in the fall, and spring and the fall, they're coming through the district. So this is a Doppler map of, you can see this is the rain system here. This is the frontal system, but all these other plumes, those are migratory birds. And they come up to such densities they can actually be picked up on Doppler radar, which is pretty awesome. So this is just an example of, we're on what we call the Atlantic Flyway. And this is showing birds coming up through, on their way back up, coming up through Cuba and Florida, and then dispersing up through Canada. And then they kind of come back down the other way. The more they learn with radio tagging and radio telemetry, the birds aren't following this quite as closely as maybe they first believe. Some birds will cut off and come down the other side of the Piedmont or the Appalachian Mountains. Some birds will come straight through the Midwest from Canada, from Alaska, and others are flying all the way across. So it's still a puzzle they're putting together, but this is just like the Flyway is a pretty good generality. So if you want to see something on the Flyway, head out to Cape May, New Jersey, go down to the Delmarva, down to Kipta, and you can see like this corridor being used. So this gives us an amazing array of birds. I just wanted to point out a couple here. Here's our swamp sparrow and our blue grosbeak. This down here is a green heron and an orchard oriole. And I'm going to go through these quickly, but what's pretty cool about this is these birds are very, very different. They're using very different habitats, but they were all within 100 yards of each other, like this great blue heron, Savannah sparrow, and eastern phoebe, and there's a flock of cedar waxwings. We have our Baltimore oriole, a kestrel, American kestrel, a northern ring swallow, and a bluebird. And this is some of our more rare species. There's like this white-crowned sparrow, a very rare one, this large sparrow, a clay-colored, and a solitary sandpiper. And the reason I have these different birds in the same area, this is a stream restoration that was done at the National Arboretum. It was a completely blown out, eroded out stream system. And working with partners, we were able to restore this and slow the water down and make a step system through. And then replanting around it. So in doing that, we know we can bring back some of these more urban or impacted areas and have this kind of variety of birds using this habitat. So these birds, photos were taken at different times of year, but all within 100 yards of each other, right along this little stream bed. So this habitat always also gives us some really rare visitors to the district. So, and I don't know if anyone got to go down and see it, but in 2021, in last July, or July a year ago, spoonbills. It seems like spoonbills were sprinkled like pink sprinkles over a cupcake all up and down the eastern coast. Even Michigan, I think Wisconsin got spoonbills, New York got a spoonbill, and the district had a spoonbill. And I didn't name it Spoonie, but birders started calling it Spoonie, and it hung out near Heritage and Kingman Island. It would fly down to Oxen Cove and come back up again. But at one point, there were 3 spoonbills down at Huntley Meadows. And the year before that, we had Barney. Barney was a barnacle goose that hung out on West Potomac Park near the tidal basin for several months. It tried to fit in with the geese. He kind of really stood out, even though he tried to fit in. But Barney was down there in December. So these are first records for the districts. So the spoonbill was last year. Barnacle goose was the year before. And I just popped in this morning because I want to keep you guys up to date. But these other photos are mine. This is not my photo, but a Say's Phoebe showed up over the weekend in Kennelworth Park, just south of Kennelworth Aquatic Gardens. So this is our bird, our new bird for the district for this year, was just seen on Saturday. The Say's Phoebe has not been refound yet. So we usually get a new bird every year. So I was hoping we'd get one for this year. So if we go back to, we had a loggerhead shrike in 2018, and I don't want to walk through all these, but this is our loggerhead shrike up here on the top right. This is Bell's Vireo, which was found at the National Arboretum. And I remember this guy was in the news as well because people were driving down from, I ran into a couple that had driven down from Philadelphia to come see this bird. This little guy here in the middle, this is the best photo I could get of him at the time, but this is a Nelson sparrow. So Nelson sparrows had not been seen in the district in 103 years. And then they're back at Kennelworth Park. So actually one was found over the weekend, and now we're finding that they're kind of regularly using small numbers, 1, 2, or 3, but they're using Kennelworth Park as the part of their migration corridor. And this was a strange year. You can see this almost like mat of grass out on the Potomac. We had a huge SAV year. So SAV is the subaquatic vegetation. And you could almost see, you could see egrets and herons just walking across the Potomac. And this is the Sabine skull, which showed up in 2017, which is pretty cool. So we've been getting about a bird a year, which is still pretty incredible with the number of birders out there. So our birds do get in the news. Some of the more famous ones, the tricolored heron, got some press. Who was over at Heritage Island last month. The bald eagles at the National Arboretum. They've got a camera running. They're in the news quite often. I always get calls about when are the chicks going to hatch? How are they doing? Even in the winter, I'll get calls about, have you seen them? Are they still together? Everything seems to be fine. I saw the male the other day. I have not seen the female from the nest. And we did ban that chick from that nest this year, and it has not been refound, which is it'd be great to find a bald eagle with a silver band on it or an aluminum band on it. But it's also not having that bird come in is great. That means it's still out there. It's still alive. And hopefully some of you got to go see it, but this on the right over here is the snowy owl that stayed down at Union Station most of last winter. It's incredible to see a snowy owl in general, but to be able to go down to Union Station in a completely urban area with people and cars and noise everywhere, and at 6:30 have this giant white owl just glide in slowly over top of everyone and perch up and just not be disturbed by the flashing, the photography and the cars and the noise, and hunt rats for hours and then fly off to do that night after night. It's really incredible that a lot of people hopefully got to go out there and see the snowy owl. And then we have some of our more infamous birds. This is the so-called attack turkey of the Anacostia Park trail, the river trail. This is probably a breeding season turkey. He might have had a couple females around, so he defended the trail like it was his own. So this photo was taken by Joe Cashman, who's the ranger, who for some reason I would go out and try to find this turkey through calls and just sitting out there and waiting for it. I wasn't able ever to see it, but every time Ranger Joe went out there, that turkey seemed to track him down and chase him around. So far the turkey has moved up into, we think it moved up into Maryland. So right now it's not a district bird, but we'll see if he comes back this winter. So what I wanted to do here today is kind of like walk you through DC, and we're going to go down the Potomac River, and then we're going to work our way down through Rock Creek Park. And then we're going to flip over to the east side and walk through the Anacostia corridor. And those will give you a great idea of the different areas of the district and different birds to see there at different times of year. So it's a very simple, but pretty accurate map that was put together by the last group that attempted to do the big year in DC about 8 years ago, led by Nick Lund. They didn't make it. They didn't break the record. And so that's still out there if anyone else wants to try it. So first I'm going to walk back through. We're going to start way up on the Potomac on the west side, up at the C&O Canal and Fletcher's Cove. So this is up in the Chain Bridge Flats area. This is the metamorphic rock I talked about. Chain Bridge is going across. And these are our ravens. They're a very social pair. Ravens are highly intelligent birds. And you can see she'll sit up there and she'll groom him sometimes. They'll talk to each other. They'll have very long conversations. And when their kids fledge, they'll also go up there and have long conversations and then they'll head out. Cool. So these are our birds are our first pair of breeding ravens for the district ever. And hopefully they'll be back for their 9th year next year. So hopefully I haven't seen them in a bit, but they go out and they disperse and then they'll come back to their breeding territory, usually in January, and set up again. But those are the ravens out there, which are awesome to see. It's great to see ravens out. So everyone tells me, what's the difference between a raven and a crow? Well, ravens are much bigger. They've got this diamond pattern on the tail when they fly, and you can see this beard they've got underneath this very, very heavy bill. But also, you're usually going to hear a raven before you see it. So, crows are like, caw, 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 caw. Now, raven is wonk, 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 wonk. It's a much bigger bird. So if you hear the wonk coming, that's who's going to be a raven up there. And we do have them in several areas in the district. These guys down here on the left are our double-crested cormorants. And you can just see the little double crest off this one here. They're hanging out there because they are almost like they're fishermen. They're waiting for the shad. So they will gather in numbers in the hundreds when the shad start running up the Potomac. And some of those trees out there will have 50, 60, 100 cormorants in them. And they're just like being weighed down by these huge blackbirds as the shad go running through. And this is one of Pythonotary warbler, which is a secondary cavity nester. So they nest in cavities that other birds make, woodpecker holes along between Fletcher's Cove and then up the Potomac. So these are some great birds to see out there. And this is where I went. These are the photos are not yesterday, but Roosevelt Island is just coming down the Potomac as it starts to slow down a little bit, get right past Georgetown, and we're at Roosevelt Island. Roosevelt Island is kind of on that split with the physiographic region. So one end of it's pretty high up. So you've got an elevated side on one side, and then we've got a tidal wetland, almost mud flat on the other. It's got a great boardwalk section which goes through that mud flat area, which is nice and low, but it's a great place to find wood ducks. I was out there yesterday, and there were the wood ducks in there. These are all, of course, these are new ones this year. The wood ducks are in their bright plumage. Ducks pair up before the winter. So the males are they've already molted out. They're all bright and shiny. They look almost comical, the amount of color on some of these wood ducks. So they'll find their mate now, and that is their job all winter, is to protect their mate from rival males and from predators so they can nest next year. So that's why you see them in their breeding colors. Now, this guy right here is a little cliff swallow. They're underneath the bridge at Roosevelt Island. It's one of the few places in the district we have nesting cliff swallows. And then if you've ever been on the island before, this is the main memorial with Teddy Roosevelt, and it's got a great canopy that goes around that circle. So if you want to see warblers, go there during migration and walk through this canopy here, and you can see ceruleans and Blackburnians and bay-breasted. They like kind of this high canopy to go through. And I was out here yesterday on this little boardwalk section. I found 34 yellow rump warblers just through there. So they're coming through in big numbers too. This is a great place to go. If we keep going down the Potomac, we're going to pass right past National Airport. It's Dangerfield Island. It's also the Washington Sailing Marina. Much different. We're talking about open water here. This is that year. This is a great blue heron on that year. We had those large SAV mats. So that guy is actually walking in the middle of the Potomac, but that SAV was so dense they could just walk right across. This is a great place to go for winter ducks. Buffleheads are out here. You can see there's usually several hundred scalp, but it's a great place to go looking for ducks. And also, we have several osprey nests out here too. They like to nest on the channel marker. So these guys are on marker number 13. Actually saw this pair this year. When osprey, they're long distance migrants. We've tracked ones in the district down to Venezuela and down onto the Amazon, and then they'll come back. And usually the male arrives first, and then the female arrives between 24 and 48 hours later. But this couple was so well timed. There were crows in their old nest, and he showed up and kicked them right out. And then she was right behind him. She arrived less than 5 minutes later and landed right in the nest as well. They kind of did a little bonding talk and nuzzle, and then they started nest building again. So it's pretty incredible. They can go thousands of miles and have that perfectly timed. And these guys down here at the bottom are American coots. We usually get a handful of coots out there every year, but this is after we had all that vegetation on the Potomac, which meant there was a huge amount of food supply for ducks. So these coots are out here. I call them the chickens of the sea because they kind of move like chickens. They're slow, and they are awesome eagle food. So this morning there was a raft of maybe 500 or 600 coots out there, and there were also more than a dozen bald eagles. So, and the eagles were taking turns diving in and grabbing a coot. So we usually start out with a couple hundred coots, to say like this year, it was like 500 or 600, come back 2 weeks later, there's 400, 2 weeks later, there's 250, and they'll slowly whittle this group down until there's about a dozen or so left. And then these guys will migrate back north. But this helps to help our eagle population survive, especially during one of those polar vortexes. They'll come down here and feed on coots. If we go just down a little bit further, because here we are looking upriver at, there's the Capitol, and there's the waterfront up there looking at. This is much more open water. This is just right north of the Wilson Bridge, and this is an incredible raft of ducks. These are more than 800 ducks out here of various species. We're talking about like redheads, canvasback, American widgeon, bufflehead are in here, scalp are in here. So this is a closer up view of this, and you can see geese are mixed in. Coots are in here as well. We've got some gadwall. So this is after we had that great seagrass year, that water vegetation year. It made all this stuff where these ducks could actually winter here. And this raft was out here for weeks. It's pretty awesome to see. And these are some semi-palmated sandpipers and a little least sandpiper also using this habitat when they were migrating through. And they had a stop over here. Well, the Tylock Park is a good place to go if you want to like scope out ducks in the winter. And sometimes you can run into one of these really, really large rafts of ducks. So if we go back up to the top of the district, up near Boundary Bridge, and kind of work our way down, which is really the heart of the district's habitats. Well, what can walk down through Rock Creek Park? Much different. The waters, it's slower streams and tributaries. They're much smaller. They have like these little valleys everywhere. It's still very hilly, so there's there places these guys can hide and kind of work their way down through. And this is where we find a lot of our forest interior species. Those are birds which are going to require, they don't do really well against the edge habitats. They need to have their territories deeper into the woods. So we're talking about like this guy, this is the official bird of the district, our wood thrush. But a lot of our thrushes, scarlet tanagers, they need these interior areas. They don't do well with it being on the outside and being disturbed. So this is just our wood thrush, this beautiful Cape May warbler, and owls. Rock Creek Park is a great place for owls. Actually, owls have done this barred owl. This is a barred owl here. Owls have done really well. They can inhabit some of even our more urban areas. There is a house on Capitol Hill on South Carolina Avenue that has a barred owl nest. At least it did for several years in there. And I remember sitting in a restaurant at out on Eastern Market, and I looked up, and there was an owl there sitting over top of us while we were having dinner. So these guys, they like Rock Creek. It's very protected, but they can expand out a little bit. But Rock Creek Park is excellent for birds. So if we move down through, I'm sorry, I want to go back to Rock Creek Park for a second. So if you're really wanting to get into birds, we are currently, in terms of fall migration, the neotropical warblers are almost filtered through and out. We're starting to get more of our winter species like white-throated sparrows, Swainson's thrush, ruby-crowned kinglets, and gold-crowned kinglet. But if you want, there's a place there called the Maintenance Yard, right near the Visitor Center and the Equestrian Center. There's some excellent birders out there. They kind of have a trail system that walks through. And the cool thing about Rock Creek Park is you can be on a ridge. And most of these birds, when they come through, they're way up in the canopy, and it makes them very difficult to see. But if you're on a ridge, you can almost see them coming up from some of these more lower areas, like you can see at the Maintenance Yard. And they're almost, if not at eye level, not too far above. So it gets you a great way to bring these birds down more to your level and to get a very good look at them as they pass through going north or south. But it's an excellent place to go. In any of going through Rock Creek Park, there's plenty of places you can go off to, and a lot of the larger tributaries like Soapstone Park, Pinehurst, that feed into Rock Creek will also act as these migration corridors for this system. So we go all the way down through Rock Creek, it's going to empty out on the National Mall. And people are like, what are you going to find on the National Mall? You will find a lot of your regular generalist backyard species like blue jays. You're going to find robins, great catbirds, different sparrows, like song sparrows. But one of the really cool places is here at Signatory Island, Constitution Gardens. This is man-made pond here. These are whistling ducks that came through this year, which is a great species for DC. But in the winter, it is covered in northern shovelers. There are a bubbler system here. So a lot of places when they freeze over, Constitution Gardens, if they've got the bubblers on, stays open water, which means bufflehead and scaup, ringneck duck, shovelers. You get some black duck in there sometimes, some other diving ducks. There's usually a gray blue heron or two, which will winter there. But then that is one of the few places they can go and still have open water they can feed. And these guys are filter feeders. Look at the bill on that guy. This is a northern shoveler. They almost have like it's like a baleen whale tongue on them that helps them to filter through, like mallards do as well, and to get a food resource from these waters. So this is a great stopover point and a wintering point. So if you want to see some great ducks really close up, go down to Constitution Gardens. In terms of the National Mall, there are other places. I know the main mall is pretty open, but if you go way to the east end, we do have the Botanical Gardens, has an outdoor area, which is a great place. And also during migration, for some reason, it's probably because tons of great oak trees there. Lower Senate Park has been just a warbler hotspot. It was this year. It was a year before. We're trying to do some work in there to put some nest boxes to bring some other species in there. But Lower Senate Park is right near the U.S. Capitol building. Great place for birds on the National Mall as well. So we're going to go down from there south through the center of the city down to Haines Point, which, there's a golf course there, but there's also wonderful bird habitat. So this is a yellow-throated warbler up here in the upper left. This yellow-throated warbler has, at this point, I think it was his 4th year there. We'll see if it returns again this year. But usually these guys are much, much further south. There's a yellow-throated warbler, which likes to winter on Haines Point. I don't think he's shown up yet. I didn't see him the other day, but he'll come here and he'll spend the winter, which is pretty hardy for this bird. But he's beautiful to see out here in the winter to see this nice yellow color. This here on the right is a Cooper's hawk. This is a great place to find hawks. They like the open area, and a golf course provides that for them. So if you want to see American kestrels, Cooper hawks, there's usually a merlin down there. There used to be a tree at the end of the golf course that had 2 bald eagles in it every day. That was kind of their wintering roost for a pair of eagles that had a nest right across the river up from the new Homeland Security building. That tree fell down last year. And so I don't know if they're going to come back and find an alternative roosting spot here this winter, or if they're going to move off somewhere else. There's a Cooper's hawk taking a bath. On rough sea days, when it's windy for us and it's pretty horrible weather, the ducks don't care. So this is a raft of canvasbacks just riding the waves on a rough day with white caps on the Potomac right off of Haines Point. And this little guy here is a blue morph snow goose. So they helped them to fit in a little better with the Canada geese that were out there. Otherwise, they'd be stark white. It stuck around for a week or two too, but if it's Haines Point's a great place to find strange geese. Like I said something about the barnacle goose was also trying to mix in. We find brant down there sometimes, but those large open areas, which we have a lot of Canada geese hanging out. Sometimes some of these rather rare goose species, even a greater white-fronted goose, will try to spend the winter there as well. So if we hop to the east, we're going to come down the Anacostia corridor now. And one of my favorite places to bird in the district is the National Arboretum. And I could spend hours and hours talking about the Arboretum. Not only do we have that fantastic stream restoration spot there, but they also have just an amazing variety of conifers and deciduous trees. And that means it's going to bring in all these different species that are going to be, this is where our bald eagle's nest is there as well. We've got great horned owls on Mount Hickey, and we've got the bald eagles are on Mount Hamilton, and there's all these other birds in between. So this is a red-eyed vireo that they come through here as well, and the red-breasted nuthatch, one of the few places to find them regularly is going to be at the Arboretum in the winter. It's just with so many different habitats, it brings in so many birds. And there's great records of birds that used to be there in the 1940s, 46 and 47 from a birderson who was a birder, but was also a volunteer and a gardener there. So I've got his records as well. So I often go through his old observations. His name is John Taylor, and I will match them up with stuff we have now to try to bring in some of the species that he used to see breeding there. He had awesome breeding species like red-headed woodpecker, which we don't have breeding in the district now, but they were breeding there at the Arboretum. in the 40s. So it'd be great to bring some of those species back. If we hop across the Anacostia River, directly across from the Arboretum, we're at Kennelworth Aquatic Gardens. And this is a great mix of tidal marsh. It's got these lily pond pools. It's got deciduous trees running across this riparian areas. And this is where we're going to find, this is the eastern kingbird, probably has one of the best scientific names in the bird world, Tyrannus tyrannus. And they are the tyrant. I have seen these guys pick a fight with bald eagles that come too close to the nest, even ones that don't even come too close. They'll sally off and chase them out of their territory. I've never seen an eastern kingbird back down from anyone. The light structure is right. The parking lot always has an osprey nest in it. They've been in there for decades. It's a great place for warblers as they're moving through. Not only do warblers, they need a food resource, but they also need to drink as well. So the pond system, there's a lot of small streams at Kennelworth Aquatic Gardens, which provide food for them as well. And this is a black and white warbler. And there's usually several, if not just one, great blue heron out here in the lily pad gardens. Kennelworth has one of probably the highest bird diversities in the district. I think we were at 224 for Kennelworth. Just in the aquatic gardens area, it was funny. For a while we had a match going on with Acadia National Park in Maine, and that park is of course 40 times the size of Kennelworth Aquatic Gardens, but when we had a redhead there, we were one up on them for a while. I have to go back and check records and see who's in the lead now, but it was nice to have like a nice rivalry going with a much larger park. If we go south from the aquatic gardens, we're in one of the best meadow habitats we have in the district, and this is called Kennelworth Park or Kennelworth North. And this is right next to what used to be an old burn pit, a landfill. It was what was considered, just like a scrub habitat, not much worse. When we're talking about birds, it is an amazing area for birds. Some of our best meadows, where we find some of our rare herps, our rare snakes are going to be in here, and also our rare insects. But in terms of bird, this is where we found the Nelson sparrow that hadn't been seen for 103 years. This is a palm warbler. Bobolinks, you can go out here and see like flocks of bobolinks on some days coming through, and they sound like any Star Wars fans out there. They're also called the R2-D2 bird because it does sound like R2-D2 when he talks. This guy down here in the middle, high stepping right here, is an immature little blue heron. When they're young, their first year, they are white, and then in a few weeks, this guy would come into a mottled blue, or not mottled, a blue and white patched kind of plumage, and then he would be all blue in the next summer. And this is a merlin. So if you take a merlin's kind of our mid-sized hawk. So if you take an American Kessel, which is our smallest falcon, and you take a peregrine falcon, which is the largest usually we'll see here. We don't really have goshawks, and you smash them together, you're going to get a merlin. It always has a stern look on its face, nice big talons, but it's an amazing wintering falcon here. There's already one at Haines Point, and there's usually one will spend the entire winter out at Kennelworth Park. But if you really want to see, this is where the Say's phoebe, our new bird for the district, and that was found over the weekend, was out here in Kennelworth Park. And on weekends you go out here and there's sometimes a dozen birders walking around looking for a lot of our more rare species in the district are here. If we come down the Anacostia River just a little bit, we're going to come to King Edward Heritage Islands. And this is where I spent a lot of my time. I tried picking up on a research project that was started before me. So we now have more than 15 years of weekly data as all of the restoration efforts have been happening at Kingman's. So this is where I talked about this used to be all just plain mud flats, no vegetation here. And this has all been redone over the last 10 years. And so this is the marshes at Heritage Island. So we have our tree swallows. Every time we put up a tree swallow box, and we just had another program with Eastern High School, we built some boxes, painted them up, and took the kids out. We put them on the different bridges which connect the islands. And I'm sure they're going to get used next year, because every time we put up nest boxes for tree swallows, they use them every year. This one here in the middle is one of my favorite birds because it's one of our smallest. It's only about 2¼ inches long without the tail. It's a ruby-crowned kinglet. They are full of attitude. They'll let you know they're there. And if they get really angry, and on the males, you'll see this little flame that pops up here in the middle. They're also running a really, really high temperature of about 114. So I think it's, I'm sorry, 112, 114 for these guys. So you'll see that they're flitting constantly. They're eating constantly because birds can't really put on a lot of weight because they need to be able to fly. So everything goes through their system really quickly, but they need to keep that furnace burning. So that's why you see a lot of these birds moving really quickly because they've got to keep that energy flow coming in. So this is one of our winter visitors, and now they're everywhere in the district right now, these kinglets, ruby-crowned kinglets. Our great egrets are out here feeding. What's really cool about the Anacostia is the tidal switch. Kingman Lake is just north of the island, and it can be 3 feet at one point, and then it can go down to 3-4 inches at another with the tide switch. And sometimes when the tide comes out, the birds come out to eat. So at this point, I think there were 18 egrets at this time walking through. When the tide starts to roll out, you'll see osprey show up, bald eagles, kingfishers. The cormorants will show up. That means it's kind of feeding time. They'll fill themselves up and then roost on the surrounding trees while the tide comes back in. And this guy here on the bottom right is a white-eyed vireo. They like these riparian corridors. We had them up at Kennelworth Aquatic Gardens before the new river trail went in, and they kind of never came back to that area as breeders. But we did have a pair breeding at Kingman Island before we did some work there. So I'm hopefully they come back. But Kingman's an excellent place to go. Now, if we go just to the east of Kingman, I know we're going to hop off the river a little bit. And this is Fort Dupont, which is over 400 acres of another forest interior habitat. And we find some more forest interior birds here as well. Like this, there's a blue-headed vireo coming through. This is an Acadian flycatcher. They breed in here in numbers. The one on the bottom left is an ovenbird, one of our warblers who stays pretty close to the ground. And this is a common yellowthroat on the bottom right. You know, we've got wood thrush in here. Fort Dupont, we also have a huge turkey population. I think I scared up 26 the other day walking through. We put camera traps out here to monitor the deer population so we know how much of an impact they're having. But I get turkeys all the time. We also know we have red fox in there and coyotes as well. Fort Dupont's a really incredible place, and we're in the middle of trying to figure out how to do a stream restoration there and not impact the species, or at least limit the impact to the certain expensive species that are in there while we're doing that. So let's move back onto the river again, back on the Anacostia, and this Anacostia Park stretches all the way down from Kennelworth down to Nats Park, right across from it. And we've got osprey, and almost half the light structures down there have osprey nests in them. Wild turkeys, this is especially during COVID, they would just walk around wherever because they got used to, people were in the parks very often when it first started. So turkeys kind of took over. During some of these Arctic events where the cold comes down and freezes the river partially, you can get different ducks. And here we've got two canvasback hanging out with a bunch of mallards. If you look down here on the bottom right there, I didn't even notice he was in there until I took the photo. This little coot has snuck in there as well. This is our greater white-fronted goose. Not only do they try to blend in with our Canada populations on Haines Point, but they'll do it over as well. Sometimes we'll get a Ross's goose, but there are some of our rare goose species will fit in here. Anacostia Park will also pick up a lot of ducks on it as well on the water. And then, of course, it's a riparian corridor, so we can find orange-crowned warblers. This is a great place to visit really any time of year. And just want to mention just a couple of our lesser birded areas. We have that entire circle park system like Fort Reno, Fort Totten, Mahon, Chaplin. Those are all national parks. They're all protected. If I want to see eastern towhees, I'll go to Fort Chaplin. I know they're in there in big densities. So every park has a different vegetative structure, has different elevation, surrounded by a different level of urbanization. So it's always good. You can go see a different number of species there. Soapstone Valley feeds into Rock Creek, so it's very similar, but it's a much rockier system. Then the main Rock Creek, Glover Archibald is where I talked about where Rachel Carson would walk. It doesn't have, there's kind of one crest in the middle, but otherwise it doesn't have the rolling hills. So most of the birds here are pretty high up, but there's a lot of these bleach blight aphids. They're down here on the right or in Glover. And when those are dancing, they call them boogie woogie aphids because they kind of shake. And when they're shaking, the warblers come in and eat them. So there's a Cape May warbler just filling up on these aphids. And then Oxen Run is a section which it's on the far east of the city. Was impacted when they put in the green line. It kind of changed the hydrology of the area. And that's a part we're kind of focusing. There hasn't been a whole lot of work done there yet. We don't have a very good idea of what birds are actually using that or not. But that's an area where we're kind of focusing on doing a lot of work there, but there's not a whole lot of birding done in there. And I talked about earlier at the beginning about red-shouldered hawks. Here's a red-shouldered hawk eating a toad that it caught in Soapstone Valley Park. So I also want to talk about besides our national parks, our backyards. They really make DC a green city. And we have these backyards, they can act as a connective corridor. So even when I was on Capitol Hill, I could see yellow warblers moving up the street trees out front. And I saw like even ovenbirds using people's backyards as a connective corridor to move up towards the Arboretum as they were going back up. So if we take all those backyards, all that vegetation, all that structure, and we put that together, it can really make a huge impact to fill in the gaps that we've lost in some of these more urban areas. And well, you can have your regular backyard birds like great catbirds here in the middle, and then this Carolina wren here on the outside. But the more they connect together, it's going to attract in other birds coming in there. So you'll get warblers, you get your flycatchers, you get some of your more rare species coming through. You get your higher bird diversity. There's a great resource on Audubon about plants for birds. They've got a little video that describes, how to plant for different birds. So if you're going to put pollinators out, you can also put out different native shrubs to bring in other birds. And the big key is keeping plants 30% native. So there was a bunch of research done with Carolina chickadees. And once the vegetative structure got less than 30% native, the populations for those chickadees started to decline. So that's kind of the threshold you want to make. The more you can have, if you can get higher than 30% native plants in your yards, it's going to attract more birds. You'll be able to sustain those populations. I get questions all the times about feeders and bird bass. Are they more for us? Do the birds need them? Feeders and bird bass, birds need to hydrate. They need to eat. A lot of the feeders that are out during when there's a lot of insects out, so they're not nearly as necessary, but sometimes we'll get harsh winters, I'll get a heavy snow, having a feeder out there to help these birds through that section. Since we've removed other resources for them already through urbanization, there's nothing wrong with that. I think the big thing is about hygiene. It's about keeping your feeders clean, keeping your bird bass clean, changing that water out, even with feeders. If there's like some kind of there's a disease outbreak, being mindful, taking them down. If we're having an issue we don't really know about, if we see, birds with different eye issues that are at your feeders, and just kind of being smart about that. But I think having feeders out there attracts in birds you don't usually see. And for a lot of people, maybe it's a starting point for birders. It makes your yard's more enjoyable, or your local park more enjoyable. So I have really no problem about that. But if you are bringing those in, just be mindful of window strikes where you place your feeder. If the birds have, if they're coming in and they think your windows and exit to the sky because it's reflecting off, they might use that as a way out and have window strikes there. So if you're going to attract those birds in, be mindful about having something, a stencil on your windows near that feeder, so you're not creating a hazard for them. And just real quickly, I want to walk through a couple of birding do's and don'ts. I like birding with buddies. I run into people in the woods all the time. If you're out, I'm always out with people that have just more experience with different types of birds. Like I think a lot of bird IDs are really difficult. So I like when a guy knows like gulls really well or fall warblers really well. So going out and birding with someone else, it's a much more enjoyable experience. You'll probably see more different birds because you're going to miss something that someone else would see. So it's great. You can join a Walk with DC Audubon or any other of those bird organizations. There's always groups going out. I've run into different birding groups which have popped up during COVID. So it's always great to see those groups out. But yeah, get on a group, go out and do a walk with a different birding group or a naturalist group. The birding community in the district is awesome. Not only there are lots of birders, they're very open and they're very friendly. They're very open to taking new people out. I mentioned Rock Creek's maintenance yard. There are some incredible birders out there. And so if you're an amateur and you want to go around some people that really know what they're talking about, it's a great way to do that. Or if you're really an advanced birder and just want to be around some people that have like a different expertise, it's a great way to go. Or to meet some new birders out there. So the birding community is really awesome. They're very welcoming. Supporting your local wildlife habitat areas, it could be like they're redoing a circle park in your neighborhood. They're putting in a community garden. It's just keeping in mind, trying to do that 30% or keep it as native as possible to attract more birds in. I use a lot of citizen science programs. I can't be everywhere, and there are birders out in the district everywhere. So they'll put their observations into eBird, which is through Cornell. And I will pull that data out. I'll use that for modeling. I'll use that for showing that this area has this sensitive bird there. And if we're going to do some kind of big project there, we need to be mindful and figure out a way to lessen the impact there. There are groups that do like the big day. There's the big sit. There's winter counts for every area coming up. We'll have to do in the district through Audubon in December. So there's a lot of citizen science out there. There's even, if you're interested, there's a Maryland DC Breeding Bird Atlas program. This is the third iteration of it, and we're going to be starting our 4th year in the spring. But that's a great way that lets us know what birds are breeding in the district and in Maryland and where. The early birder does get the bird. Birds are more active in the morning, usually from sunrise to around 11, depending on the temperatures. So if you really want to see more birds be out early, you'll see the behaviors as it gets hotter. They settle down. They don't want to overheat. And then especially during migration, then they'll usually pick up again in the late evening. So you can go out and see them then, but try to go out early if you can. There are some awesome field guides out there. I like having a paper field guide with me, especially when it comes to warblers and certain species, but the apps, it's hard. You've got this encyclopedia birds you can carry around with you all the time. Merlin is a great app that's great for beginners. It does do audio files as well. So it'll tell you kind of what bird is making that noise. But the apps are not perfect. They do make mistakes, especially with Vireos and some of the other ones that are pretty close. So you got to be really careful about that. And then going to the same spot different times a year. So the birds change every week, sometimes every day, as especially through migration when stuff is coming through. So visit the same spot different times of year, you're going to see different birds. And the quick don'ts are safety first. Don't go into an area where you don't feel unsafe. That's why birding with friends is a way to go. Be out with someone. Just be mindful. You don't want to wear red or other bright colors, especially red in the bird world is kind of signals either danger or someone else's territory. It'll either frighten them off, or in the case of a sandhill crane, they might challenge you. But you want to kind of just, you don't have to be in full camouflage, but just be a little more subdued and mindful of what you're wearing. And it is overwhelming sometimes. I'll go out there and there's just so many birds moving, so much noise. It's hard to pick through it. Or if there's something you can't figure out, you don't get a good look at it. It just takes time and practice, and you'll get there. And the other thing is the use of playback and calls. I get this asked all the time about, do I play bird sounds and try to get them to come in closer? I only use playback if I'm doing a specific survey for a bird, which is very cryptic, which is very hard to see, like a certain marsh bird, and I'll do it to a limited degree, and it's within a margin. I don't want to change their behavior. Remember, these birds are trying to either refuel during migration, and they've got limited energy supply. So I don't want to waste that energy responding to me. It's just for identification or detection, and then that's it. So you got to be just very judicious in your use of calls. I sometimes will, if I think I hear something I'll go somewhere else and play it for myself to make sure I have the correct sound or the correct call. I'm making a correct ID, and that's about it. So just be very careful about that. Hey, and if birds aren't your thing, which I completely get, there's a lot of other stuff, cool stuff out there in the district. We have coyotes. We had that one bobcat, which came up the C&O Canal. We got spotted salamanders, beautiful invertebrates out at, I think it's a Halloween pendant at Kennelworth. We've got long-eared bats. We're a threatened species. And these cool kids, the flying squirrels. We have northern flying squirrels as well. So there's something out there for everyone. So I just want you to really just, if you can, get out and enjoy the district's wildlife.
Dan, thank you so much. I think the only thing we'd rather do with you now is to go for a walk with you. This has been really like a stroll through the district's environment and great places we can see birds. So thank you so much. We're going to have a lot of questions for you, and we'll stay on the recording for a little while longer. But we have another naturalist here on the Zoom. And if Melanie is still with us, I wanted to give her a chance. Melanie, are you still on? She may have gotten off because she had a tight schedule. If any of you know Melanie Chukas-Bradley, she's a renowned naturalist.
Melanie did have to jump off, and she emailed us.
Okay.
And she asked for Dan's email because she wants to reconnect with Dan.
Great.
So Melanie is great. So I have learned, I started taking her class because I wanted to learn more about habitat, more about, I wish I had a more botany background. It wasn't available when I was in school. That it was, the more I learn about the habitat is the big driver for what species are going to be there. So I could go out the woods with her, and she would, she'd know the different types of oak, the different types of tree structure, the ephemerals, and that all drives the wildlife that is going to be there. And so if you have a great idea, and like you can, it's great going out with botanists because they can read a vegetation quality instantly by the species that are there. And then if there's a bird species or there's a wildlife species which isn't there, which isn't present, then I kind of know there's a problem. But that's the big driver. So I was actually taking her classes years and years and years ago to try to be better understanding of habitat and how that is used. Now I'm out. I actually, when I find a nest, I make note of the tree. So if I want to find yellow rump warblers in the winter, I want to find poison ivy that has fruit on it, and that's where they're going to be. If I want to find an eastern kingbird nest, I look for a sycamore leaning over one of our rivers, and the kingbirds are going to be in there. So it's really as habitat as the driver.
And just a special note, a little homage to Melanie, the book that she wrote on Theodore Roosevelt Island, I should say, starts with a kingfisher. So some of her best books really begin with birds. So I encourage you all to read the books and learn more about habitat and birds through her work. And now I know we've got lots of questions in the chat. Anna, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah,
and
a couple of questions did come in through the chat. Emily asked, when you were talking about the rare birds, are these rare birds in isolation doing okay? Like, are they okay by themselves, or were they left behind by companions?
If you're talking about through migration, our rare birds are, it's a lot of it's dispersal. So like pelicans will, a lot of times when they leave the nest, they'll go north for a little bit and come down. So we'll get brown pelicans or white pelicans coming up through, and then they'll kind of turn around and go. So like the spoonbills, they said they had a really good spoonbill year. So they kind of just will disperse out. Birds don't weigh much. Sometimes they're just a couple ounces. So if we have a storm system come through, it kind of picks them up, and we'll move them as well. They use a lot of our frontal systems to help them migrate. It's kind of like putting on a jetpack and there they go. But it can act the other way. It can maneuver them off of there. I think Alaska, they had a bunch of storms in the Pacific over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So Alaska had 8 or 9 new birds that were never seen there before. And those are all being picked up and pulled up through storm systems. So weather can disperse them. When we get a ton of snowy owls down here, it's usually they had a really good snowy owl year, and they just the young keep dispersing down. So it's sometimes it's symbolic of them doing really well, that we're going to get those extras. Otherwise, it could just be like, you know, a rare vagrant that's off course.
I have a question for you. I love owls, but I've only seen one in the wild once. I saw a barred owl at Huntley once, and you mentioned great horned owls at the Arboretum. Are those visible only at night or during the day, or when could one see one of those?
When it comes to owls, they are a sensitive species, so I only give out the exact nest location.
Sure. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
If you want to hear owls at the Arboretum, you want to go there in January and February, and they'll start, you know, talking usually about a half an hour before sunset, and you can hear them.
Great.
It's with all our owls here. Even there's you know, I had a pair in the backyard because their tree got knocked down a couple streets over, and they sat up here for a couple months, and they talked all day. I had no idea. You know, sometimes I'll be on a Zoom call and people are like, "What is going on in your house?" I said, "It's the two owls out the window. They won't be quiet." But they're around. It's just usually you're going to hear them. They'll get much more active about a half an hour before sunset, and like 2 or 3 hours after, as then they do a lot of their talking. For some reason, like 3 a.m. too seems to kick in. But they're most talked up like January, February, and March.
Got it. Thank you. One of our DC Master Naturalists and Master Gardeners, Kathy, asked, she thought when you were talking about native plant percentages and getting it to at least 30%, she said she thought it was 70% native. Have you heard like other percentages or?
Did I do that inversely? I'll go back and look at that.
30, yeah. You know, I was thinking about that too. I think
I might have that backwards.
That's right.
That was I'd have to go back and look at that research paper. It might have been the threshold, might have been if you go above 30% invasive, you lose them. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Yeah, we just wanted to put that out, and we can probably grab.
No. That's thank you.
Link.
So, you know, if I could, you know, it's so easy to flip those to 70-30. Dan, I think you had it totally right on the 70-30.
It might be the other way.
It's the reverse.
It's
I remember that chickadees study really well because it's the most amazing thing that chickadees need 400 caterpillars a day to feed their chicks, a brood of 3. And so I remember that and the associated percentage, which is 70% native for that chickadee family to survive and get enough of those caterpillars, and 30% non-native.
That's a big mistake. Thanks for pointing it out. Like 70 and 30%, that's huge. So yeah, okay.
No,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Yay, Master Naturalists.
Yay, yeah, we're all in this together, all us nature nerds. Teresa asks, over the last 20 years, the Rock Creek Park seems to have a lot less diversity in the understory, a lot more such as false buttercup. For example, I see fewer jack in the pulpit. Do the dogs running through the woods off leash and off trail have a large impact in this respect?
They do. Off leash dogs are a huge issue. So are the deer populations. This was probably the highest density of deer in the United States was in Rock Creek Park there for a bit. They've been doing deer management there, and they're trying to get that underneath control. That also takes out the understory. Now that's happening in Fort Dupont and some of our other parks. So it's kind of it's keeping a lot of that in check. And invasive species are a huge issue. I don't know, people that work on invasive species removal, or they're weed warriors, or some of these early response teams. I think that is an incredible fight, trying to keep that in check, or at least keep it low enough that it gives some of our native animals a chance to adjust. It's the speed of that which really has such an impact. It could be a number of factors. It could be someone's stuff coming out someone's backyard. Deer will pick up different things and deposit it. Birds are also an issue. If there's non-native seeds in certain area, they're eating them, or honeysuckle and Japanese honeysuckle all the time. They're just depositing those seeds. They spread it too. It's a much more complex, I think, problem and solution than just something pretty simple.
Got it. That seems to be a lot of the comments that we have were praised for your presentation, Dan. Everyone was really excited. Everybody was excited that we had several people asking if it was recorded, if they had to jump off at 1 o'clock. We have your colleague Trin mentioned an event this weekend. The Kingman Island Family Day is this weekend. So she wanted to mention that. Yeah, so why Teresa says, why are local garden centers allowed to sell non-native species?
So there are, Maryland has a list of species they can't sell. The district, I don't know if the district has an extra step. They have to go through congressional approval for everything. So I don't know if those regulations have gone through yet or not, but there are certain species which you can't sell, and it's really that's a process and working on it. Trying to get some of that stuff that's the ornamentals are what people want to plant in a lot of areas. They do really well they do it well for a reason, because they can be aggressive and they can take some of these our temperature swings. But there are certain ones that will get out, will cause damage, and will be invasive, and kind of working through that. It's I think there is a list for the district coming.
Got it.
There were a couple of questions. I don't know if they came to me individually or whether it was sent in the chat. Elizabeth Gearian had asked whether you guys are tracking, you guys meaning DOEE, the birds at Oxenron Park, because she was noting that the stream restoration is going to be taking place there. And so it would be really interesting to see what the bird life is like now, and then perhaps 10 years later when the stream has been restored.
Yeah, I try to do that there are a lot of daylighting operations. So I'm trying to do that as best as I can. I've been doing that with Fort Dupont, because there's a big one going on there. I did the Arboretum. I just can't be over there and maybe give that. I really try to do it. I can be there if I can. And I try to plan those out, 2-3 years in advance, so I can get ahead of these programs. But sometimes there's 3 or 4 happen at the same time. I can't do it.
Well, talk about the role of citizen scientists, because I think there are people on this call who could help you out with that.
Yeah, so having that data, that's why I pull a lot of stuff. If you don't find me in the middle of Rock Creek Park during migration at the maintenance yard, because there are already people taking that data. There are certain areas which are more heavily birded by other people that if I can use that data from eBird, I don't have to be there, which is great. So I can be in another spot which either has limited access, restricted access, or maybe a little more unsafe at certain times, that I can get in there and do that. But yeah, Oxenron would be one of those. So I do, if you're out there and you're entering your stuff into eBird, I do use it. iNaturalist is a little different. That's harder doing birds in iNaturalist, I found. So I really don't use that one for it. But I use that for other things.
Before we turn off the recording and then we can go into a master naturalist kind of in-depth discussion, there was someone who asked about birding places in Maryland. And so I'm wondering if you could highlight for the folks who are here from the greater DMV, can you name a place or two in Maryland and maybe a place or two in Virginia where you would encourage people to do some birding? Sure.
If you're in Maryland, anything up the C&O, Violet's Lock, further up there, there's McKee Brushers is incredible. That's also further up. We can have meadows there, and there's ponds there. And if you want to go all the way up to, Catoctin and Fort Bennett Park, those are also great places to be. And if Virginia, just south of us, Huntley Meadows, you go down to Mason Neck as another one, which are pretty easy lifts if you're, out from DC and going down there and want you see something different. I do know a lot of people that will go out to Manassas Battlefield from here to do sparrows as well. So there are birds everywhere. Just find a park near you, or maybe someplace that isn't that popular and hasn't been explored yet. Be the first one out there to check it out.
Yeah, it's great. We are really in a fortunate area. At this point, let's go ahead and turn off the recording. But if you have time, please stay on.
Sure.
So Anna, if you could turn